Hey, Instagram and YouTube, Howard Gearhauser here with my dad, Dr. G. In today's video, we wanted to talk about biomedical research and the fact that biomedical research is oftentimes incorrect because of the amount of money that's poured into it. So you ran across an article that was correlating how much money was invested into research with how inaccurate that research actually turned out to be. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, the epidemiologist out of Stanford University, an MD, looks at the biomedical research, and he has a whole team of professors and graduate students under him, and this whole team has analyzed research for a long time. He came out with an article that kind of made him famous back in 2010, saying that nearly all the biomedical research, the stuff that we base how we practice medicine, or how we treat a disease, that almost all of it is false. And of course, that opened a lot of eyes when, if a doctor that's way out in left field says that, no one's going to pay attention. But a professor at Stanford that is highly into academia, when they say that, people listen, especially when after he publishes that article, Stanford doesn't fire him. It kind of opens a lot of eyes. And that was the most cited. So one of the things that research uses is like how impactful a research article, a published research article is how many times it's cited. So that article was cited, I forget exactly what they said, but something like the most highly cited article ever, if you can imagine that. So, so he was sort of, I think, inadvertently bringing out the actual problem. Is what scientists are looking for is something that grabs your attention. And that's because, excuse me, that's because it's very competitive to get published, especially in the journals that are quote unquote highly respected. So you have to have something impactful, something that grabs people's attention, or at least doctors or other scientists' attention, going, oh, wow, that's counterintuitive. Or who would have guessed that? Like, oh, vitamin D, if you have low vitamin D, you have twice as many heart attacks. So you see a title like that, it grabs you and you go, wow, they found the holy grail to prevent heart disease. All we need to do is buy some vitamin D, because the study shows that low vitamin D is correlated to having a heart attack. And so studies like this are the ones that get published. And the ones that have a negative result, like if someone did a study and they found that, did a big study, spent a lot of time analyzing the data, and they came up with vitamin D, plays no role either way, increasing heart attacks or no one's going to publish that because it doesn't have anything to say. So they're only going to publish the things that grab you. Then they're only going to design their study so they're likely to find something that grabs you. And then a lot of times they just go fishing for something that's statistically significant in the study they did. And what pops out as statistically significant, if that sounds like, oh, that will grab people's attention, it's more likely to be published. If you're a professor or you're in an academic setting, publish or perish. If you don't publish, you don't get promoted. So, no one's going to write the negative study. But science should publish any good study that they do, positive or negative. But unfortunately, that isn't the way the system is. And then, of course, Ioannidis, as you just mentioned, Ioannidis, I read this quote just recently, and I don't know the context of it, but Ioannidis said, the more money that's involved in that industry or topic or whatever you're studying, the more likely that the study's findings will be false. And so they have a whole team looking, so they can, take this statistical analysis and look at thousands of studies and come up with, hey, yeah, like a good example is the statin drugs. The statin drugs this year are supposed to finally have taken in $1 trillion. Okay, $1 trillion for a drug that in my estimation, is a toxin. And I do believe it reduces heart attacks because it has an effect of reducing inflammation. So that's why when they do a study and somebody gets a stent, or if someone's having a coronary artery bypass graft, they've done studies where if you put them on statins before the surgery, they have less problems afterwards. They have less clots, less repeat heart attacks. And that's because we know there's several mechanisms of the statin drugs that decrease inflammation. One of the things they do is they improve endothelial function, which is the function of the inner lining of our arteries. I don't know if you know, but in the heart, there are 3 times more endothelial cells than there are heart muscle cells. So the heart endothelium, the lining of the arteries, and when it gets down to the tissue level at the very branch, you know how blood vessels branch like trees, you know, the fractal design in nature, they branch like trees. And when they get to that final branch, so there's one red blood cell goes through their capillary, the width of one red blood cell, and then it's surrounded by several endothelial cells. So the endothelial cells outnumber the heart cells. Well, statins increase nitric oxide, which is helpful for the health of the endothelium. But the problem with statins is most of the studies show that they don't improve your mortality over the long term. And that's because they're also a toxin. They increase diabetes. You know, diabetes is a bad disease to get. It's a leading cause of why people go blind. It's a leading cause of why people lose their kidney function. It's a leading cause why people have amputations. So here we're giving somebody who's going to significantly increase their risk of diabetes for an anti-inflammatory effect. But there's many substances out there that have an anti-inflammatory effect. You know, so I definitely wouldn't go with statins as your first choice on that. So it's interesting. And so what the industry did is they paid scientists to come up with scenarios. So we know what the statin drugs do is they dramatically lower LDL cholesterol. So what the industry did with $1 trillion to bribe everybody is they made it seem like LDL cholesterol, which is what the statin drugs lower pretty dramatically, that LDL cholesterol was the cause of heart disease. Now, new research, more is building all the time that's saying that is just not true. Now, it is true that the more stress you're under, the more your LDL cholesterol is going, I mean, physical stress, like things in your arteries, like plaque in your arteries, your LDL goes up because it's one of our protective mechanisms to try to plug up holes that might start a clot. So our LDL going up, yes, it can be an indicator that something's not right in your system, but it's not the cause, in my opinion. It's not the cause. And so the way research is funded and the reasons people have to publish, they have to get something exciting out there so they don't publish the mundane stuff. But science is supposed to stack everything together into a kind of a holistic picture. You take the positive studies, the negative studies, you don't differentiate, and you don't not publish studies that just because they seem boring. But unfortunately, you know, we're humans and we have to be excited before we'll read something. So it's human nature, but it's hurting us because it's leading us down the path that, and this is how doctors are brainwashed, that you need a randomized controlled trial, which usually is false, you know, for all the reasons I just talked about, and probably some others thrown in there too.
So a lot of this research is foundational in why we move forward with prescription medications or procedures or surgeries if we're talking about mainstream medicine. And it's also, I guess, foundational in the development of different products and whatnot. So is what you're saying that if the biomedical research is biased or they're cherry picking the statistics that they want to use, that we're kind of building a whole system on a shaky foundation?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. We can't rely on it. And it's good that there's multiple, mainstream scientists in academia that are pointed out. When people like me pointed out an alternative doctor, people don't listen. They go, oh, well, he's an alternative doctor. And the problem's the same with the research on herbs. If someone patents a certain form of the herb and they do a small study, the same bias is there. So this goes across the board. It's not just drugs. It's even vitamins and herbs. And the vitamin D research, is the epidemiology of vitamin D was that if your vitamin D is low, it's bad for your health in multiple ways. But then they have done a lot of randomized controlled trials of giving D pills because, the modern human goes, well, if it's low, let me take a pill. But almost all the randomized controlled trials there, and this is good in that it looks like they're being honest, although, who knows? But the trials haven't panned out. But no one's got a patent on vitamin D. So that might be another reason the trials don't pan out, because people doing the research have an agenda. And that's why Ioannidis said, way back in 2010, that almost all the research studies that we have now in the literature are at best a half truth.
And that's why it's important for those of you out there trying to figure out what type of health program you should be following or what type of information you should be following. You should always question and follow the money. Is this completely tied to a product that they're trying to push on me? What's the agenda behind it before you start taking something? Because if the science is what they're using to justify you taking the product, but you understand that profit is the motivation for them, you might want to get a second opinion on that. Our loyalty to you guys is providing the truth. That's our business model, not products specifically. So if that's something that you're interested in having some help with, you could check out customhealthprogram.com to learn about how we can guide you in the right direction. But if not, just always remember to question the bias in anything you're doing, especially with mainstream medicine. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, mainstream medicine has a long track record of, making certain biomarkers of a disease, or even making a disease something to profit on. And there's the social anxiety disorder that there's a whole book written about that, how that was invented by a drug company to just try to sell their pills. So you got to watch out for this. I believe the LDL cholesterol, the focus on it as being the leading cause of heart disease, which is still in the mind of the patients and the doctors, I would say 90% of them, it's still there. But the new research is poked many, many holes in that. Now, the statin drugs in particular, as I said, they're anti-inflammatory. So if you've recently had a procedure or something, there is pretty solid evidence that it can help you in the short term. But as a long-term measure, I personally would try to do everything in my power to avoid it for myself, because I don't want to be taking something that is blocking the production of a critical molecule in my body that nature put there. And so that's one of the things that these randomized controlled trials completely throw out is, what are the things in nature that make things work the way they're supposed to? And we talk about this ad nauseum because it's so important. And that's like setting your circadian rhythm by getting in the sun every day and blocking artificial light at night. If you're not doing that as a baseline, your randomized controlled trial, is meaningless. Yet there's no question that this is how nature rolls. There's no doubt. The Nobel Prize was awarded for it in 2017. The research was built up over 20 years before that. So it's not something that is speculation. There's no agenda in the scientists that have worked out the mechanisms of the circadian rhythm. I mean, there was an agenda. They still have to publish or they perish. So our scientific research needs to be revamped. Like I said, they need to try to just build a picture of how nature works, because disconnecting from nature seems to be at the root of all the problems out there.
And also just getting kind of a fresh batch of scientists in there, younger people who are really curious about finding alternatives, who aren't just totally sold and have, spent so much time within this paradigm. A lot of the older scientists, it's like going against what they've been doing for their entire career at this point doesn't make any sense. They're not going to make that total drastic paradigm shift right now. So it's important that our young scientists remain curious, want to explore ways that we can truly get to the root causes of not only disease, but like you mentioned, understanding how nature's incorporated and understanding the mechanisms of nature so we can get back to just being in sync. Anything you want to add before we sign off?
Yeah, and the problem with that is the old guys, the guys my age that are out there, they're the guys that decide what's published. And so that's why our system is so brutal, and why Ian Nadas would say every single study is flawed, because just of the way it's set up. The old guys, the old guard that don't want to change their way, they're not going to okay it. If it doesn't get okayed, it doesn't get published. If that author doesn't get published, they don't bring home the bacon. They don't, get advanced in their career. And basically they're out of a job if they don't toe the line. And that's why we're here, is to tell you that you've got to look straight to nature right now. Because if you depend on science, and you depend on especially medical science and the pharmaceutical companies, they're going to lead you astray. I would say 9 times out of 10, 1 time out of 10, they're going to save your life. So don't throw them out the window.
Yeah, there's a time and place for the miracles that mainstream medicine can provide. But in terms of long-term solutions and not just quick fixes, we have to get back to nature. We have to get back to the way human beings were designed to, be in harmony with nature. So I think that's it for this one. We'll see you guys on the next video. Thanks for watching.